You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Welcome to Convenience Matters. My name's Jeff Lenard with NACS.
And I'm Stephanie Sikorski with NACS.
So, Stephanie, we often talk about the importance of advocacy, and to a great extent, it's an internal discussion. We are here near Washington, D.C. on a regular basis, and so we're able to go to the Hill as NACS staff on a fairly frequent basis. So today, we're going to turn it around a little. Instead of having people who live inside the Beltway might be able to go to Capitol Hill more, we want to talk to it from somebody who's really from the other side of the country, who can tell us how to get started in advocacy and how to continue and really make a difference in how do we interact with our elected leaders.
Well, and I think that's a great point, just to be able to talk about outside of the Beltway here, that you can still make a difference when you're one state, two state, or all the way across the country.
And if you don't know what inside the Beltway is, stay tuned. We'll also explain that. So today we're joined by Dan Alsaker, and he is the principal of Alsaker Corporation. They have 7 pilot flying J's in the Pacific Northwest, which is about as far away from D.C. as you can get. But he stays about as close in contact with the folks from D.C. as you can get. So welcome, Dan.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Jeff and Stephanie. It's nice to be here and share my story.
So let's just start with, how do you get started in advocacy? Because we have notes, or we tell folks about come to the NACS Day on the Hill, or come to other organizations, PMAA, NATSO, etc. And the hardest thing we find is people to take that first step. It's very difficult for somebody to say, okay, I'm going to get on a plane, I'm going to talk to my elected leader. That's scary. There's a start, though. You start at the local level, don't you?
That is, and that's exactly where I got started. I love the word advocacy, but I think it in and of itself is a little bit of a scary term. So when you think about advocacy, it means participating, and when you think about democratic government, you are participating in that issue. And when I got started as a young person, really young person, I had the opportunity to disagree with a couple of things that were going on, and someone said, if you want to make a statement, then go to the place where you can make a statement and have someone listen to you. Well, I wasn't ready to pack up my bag and come to Washington, D.C., or even my state capital, so I was lucky enough to have Senator Warren Magnuson still in office, had an office in Spokane, and I got an appointment with him to talk about rest area commercialization, which we're still talking about today, about 40 years later. And he listened to me and he said, you know, young man, I'm the gentleman who inserted that into the Eisenhower bill back in whatever year that was, 57?
57, I think. Yeah.
And that the 47,000 miles of interstate highway should stay commercial free. So I am supporting you on that. And it was one of those little victories, I guess, in participating that I really enjoyed. But meeting the man that actually put that piece of legislation in was a bit of a spark for me. And so as things rolled, I was able to do a few more things on the truck stop side. I was able to do a few more things on the restaurant side, and then met a local state senator, a guy by the name of Sam Guess. And Sam was a powerful individual in terms of his position in the state. And so other things came up, taxing issues, and I called Sam, and Sam listened to me, and Sam invited me over to the state capitol. He introduced me to the governor. And so that was really how I started to participate in how the process was working and how it came about and what happens if you say something. That's the key. If we don't say anything, then no one knows what you're thinking. And if you don't know what you're thinking, they're going to make it up. And that happens all the time. So I found out that if I said something logical, if I said something that had some substance and could be backed up, then these people would listen. If a law was going to be made or a law needed to be changed or interpreted, maybe that was going to help. and with a few successes and a lot of failures. I mean, there's certainly failure in business along the way. Those are good learning spots. I love to learn, but I don't love to make a lot of mistakes. But it was fun to have a few victories along the way, especially with some powerful people. So that's how I got started. It was just me participating, making my voice heard, and I found that somebody listened, and that was pretty exciting.
And when we're thinking about operating a convenience store and you have a few, and listening to what you have been able to do and your involvement, there's, I'm sure, people that are listening right now thinking, well, even running one store takes a lot of time. So how do you run multiple stores and still maintain the advocacy piece? What does that look like, or what would your advice be to someone that's looking to get started?
Well, here again, you got to get started. You got to jump in. You got to figure out where and what. And the best place that I found was to get involved with my local Chamber of Commerce. So I called up, asked if I could participate. They gave me the right directions to the next meeting, and I raised my hand a couple of times and found out that was only at lunchtime, and I could break away from my business at lunchtime once a month to participate in a meeting. And the next thing I knew, I was on the board. And then the next thing I knew, I was chairing up the transportation committee. But all of those things were still morphed around that lunch hour. It wasn't taking a lot of my time, so I could blend that in. And I think as we grow, we learn how to balance life. It's the whole piece of too much of this is not good enough. 2 bowls of ice cream isn't going to do anybody good, but if we let a 7-year-old have 2 bowls of ice cream, he's going to eat them and then have a tummy ache. Right. And I learned how to balance that stuff out, I guess, early on. And that's really what helped me, so that when I was able to grow, when I was able to learn, when I was able to put pieces together, I could expand, certain things and still keep the balance. Because you've got family, you got business, you've got all the other community things that you do. And this piece fit in just really handily for me. Well, and that's how I grew.
I never really thought about, until you just raised it, how advocacy is also marketing. It's also it's about making connections. So when you do go to these lunchtime meetings, not only are you able to raise your voice around a specific issue, but you also met somebody else who knows this, or somebody else says, I didn't know anything about your store. I'm going to go check them out. Or I have this skill, and then you have somebody that you can work with. So it may start as advocacy, and it may come into something that involves community and marketing and something much, much bigger.
Well, and I like what Dan said earlier about participation, and I think participation is such a loaded term in terms of being active and collaborating. Like when you unpackage that, there's so much there. It's not about just, even though you can still physically be there and participate, but I think the real value for yourself as an individual and what you're able to do in terms of impact comes from opening that up a little.
It certainly does. And Jeff, you said something earlier that may tie into that, Stephanie, which I felt I got really good schooling in it, and that was that all of the legislators that are back here in Washington, D.C., inside the Beltway, as you explained, all come home. And I'm at their home, and I'm a voter. And so that became a really important piece, especially after I met Senator Magnuson. I figured out that, all these people come back, so I don't have to come to D.C. in the early stages and spend a lot of money on an airplane and a hotel and time away from my business, that I could pick up on them as they came back to their offices. Again, just had to meet the people. And right there in the Chamber of Commerce, guess who was there? One of the staff people for one of the congressional people. And I got to know them. We marketed a little. And I said, if and when Tom Foley, who was the person in charge at that point in time, comes home, I'd love the chance to talk to him. So that led to a meeting with Tom Foley. And we all know he was the Speaker of the House at one point. So pretty powerful guy from little Spokane, Washington. So yeah, marketing, taking that opportunity, meeting somebody, and then balancing that all out is really how I got started. And I think that that's not a bad combination.
And if you were to describe what those meetings are like for somebody who's never been in one, meeting your senator, it's not something where it's somebody who's pretending to be in the room. It's not something where they're just playing at the clock. They're actually they're interested in meeting with you. And you also get to see some of their other folks who are writing those laws or more involved or engaged on a daily basis in how those laws, how those regulations work, take us through, or give us a mental image, or what these meetings look like and how they play out.
Happy to. And I have to say something with this smile that probably no one can see, that everybody wants to go to those meetings and meet the senator and meet the representative and so on and so forth. And being a little shy and a little bashful on the front end, I kind of migrated over to one of the staffers, and I got myself talking to them and felt comfortable with them, felt comfortable with the questions and the answers. And then came, the senator in, and I was nervous, and I think they were nervous, and we were asking questions that we know were homogeneous to each other in terms of importance, and all of a sudden, it clicked, and I had a chance to tell my story. And that's when it really started to dawn on me that that's what they wanted to hear, how it affected me.
Right, and you're speaking human to human at the end of the day.
Human to human. But the important piece there was I met the staffer. And little did I know in those early days that a lot of the stuff behind the scenes goes on with staffers. And I'm thanking my lucky stars that I found that out early in the game, because that's how I've placed myself in my marketing role as I've moved through this system and this process, is to make sure that the staffer understands what I'm doing. No surprises to the boss. Let's keep it plain and simple. Of course, we disagree once in a while. And of course, we agree once in a while. And everything else in between is what we talk about.
And also, right, so you go from there, you go from local, and Stephanie and I, in our roles at NACS, we talk about, you got to come to D.C., you got to come to D.C. to make a difference. In addition to what you do on a local level, tell us about your hopscotching across the country 3-4 times a year with both NATSO and NACS, and why you come to D.C. And we were lucky enough that you're here in person today outside of D.C. because you're going to have meetings on Capitol Hill.
Exactly. I never want to waste an opportunity. And that getting back here, whether it's with, again, the staff person for the folks, or whether it's maybe an agency or a committee, I found that those are really important meetings as well, to meet permanent committee members and so on. But once I got through that initial stage and learning in the process, which was really easy to do, I might say, just a matter of participating, I found that the invitation to come back here came, and I made that long trip. I mean, it's takes a few hours to get here, and it certainly takes a few hours to get yourself oriented to the DC traffic and the people. And once you got that down, it's a matter of just getting up on the hill and going to those offices, getting through security and all that sort of stuff. But it comes down to, again, you're a human. You're talking that story to the person who's there, and all of a sudden, instead of one staffer in the room, you may have 3 or 4 staffers in the room, because the subjects you touch on really do fall into about 3 or 4 different categories. So for me, again, some success on the backside of that story helped me on the next time around. And then you get a little bit of experience, and all of a sudden, whether it's NACS or NATSO or the Restaurant Association, which is really where I got my big foot in the door, was the Restaurant Association. They're asking you your opinion, and so you become that consultant, Jeff, or that expert, and that's how I started my process of coming back here. Not that I couldn't have done it from my desk at home through a Skype type atmosphere or not, but there are so many other people to see back here, so many other opportunities once you're here, that you can maximize one visit into probably 4 or 5 different pieces.
And also there's you talked about the connections earlier on the local level. On the national level, it was about 1.5 years ago that Carolyn in our office says, Dan has met this group, Department of Homeland Security. They have the Blue campaign, and that addresses human trafficking. It's something that they want to help talk about how truck stops and convenience stores can be the solution, and how we can help an important issue, and it's good for communities. And you essentially put us in touch with them, and that led to here we are in the summer of 2018, and we recently did a Facebook Live hour-long segment with some fairly significant other industries that are also looking to address the issue. So it's about putting people in touch with people that have common interests, because you are engaged, because you are participating, and then all of a sudden we're doing something that we didn't know we could do. And that's a big part of staying engaged.
I think not only not knowing something we could do, but thinking of the convenience space and how we're uniquely positioned because of the number of communities and states and other that we're in, and especially talking about a campaign like this, the impact that we can have. And that was what was really kind of hit me the hardest the first time that we met, and with you telling your story about how you got involved and what it meant to be a part of a campaign like this and the difference that you've been able to make.
Well, the compelling story here is, you know something's right or something's wrong, and you got to do something about it or tell your story, I guess, depending on how you look at that. And that was the opportunity I had being in the truck stop business, and we have had a host of convenience stores as well. We see a lot of this traffic coming back and forth. Now, the first thing that people think of in terms of traffic is ladies of the evening, or as the truck stops called them, lot lizards. But I mean, a horrible name. I totally agree up front with that. But what we are also seeing was nationalities that didn't know how to speak English, and it didn't look like they belonged, or that they didn't have a purpose for being there, and then young children. And so all of a sudden it started clicking on me that this doesn't look right, it might not be right. So you do a few things, you ask a few questions, and you get the temperament of the eyes dropping and the chin dropping, and they know that they shouldn't be talking to you, and that just takes that compelling story, and you embrace it. You just know that you've got to get involved. And that's kind of where I was at. So my luck, again, locally, was I got a hold of an agency that I knew represented this kind of thing, and I asked them about it, where their clients or customers, I guess you might say, came from. And they said, well, they come from all walks of life. We get them in here. We try to break their habits, whatever the case may be, get them a warm bed, get them some food, get them to another step in their life and their life's journey. And I said, well, what happens then? Well, they're on their own. And usually they fall back into the same pattern again. And I said, well, that doesn't make sense. So that's how I got a little bit more involved than just, say, the regular folk. And the next thing I knew, I was saying, geez, we can make a difference if we just educate people, if we just tell them what's going on. This is nothing new. We've just got to get the word out there. So we started to do it internally. And what we found was that nobody wanted to talk to us. I mean, the people just were afraid to talk. And it dawned on me that they might be fearing for their life. I mean, literally their life if they did. So one thing led to another, and we found out what a silent disease this really is. And I'm talking about all three areas, the child labor, the servitude labor, and the prostitution. And all of a sudden they don't want to talk. So we made sure that through a lot of efforts of a lot of people, we've got 800 numbers posted around where they can make a phone call for free and say, this is something that I need to get out of. Now, they don't do that right off the bat, and then there's other agencies that can come in and help once they've made the decision to try to jump out of that life that they found themselves into. But one of the more interesting stories that I got myself into was back in Washington, D.C. I was calling on a congressional office, and it was about something totally different. The next thing I knew, I was talking to this young lady out front. She was a receptionist, and she said, may I talk to you in private? And so we walked out, got ourselves into a quiet corner. She said, I can't say how much I appreciate what you're doing. I'm a victim. And I was so shocked. This was something that stratified through all walks of life. It wasn't just migrants that come into the country looking, to make a better life. This was just, and so I can go a long ways with that. But it was one of the most interesting and starkly serious conversations I've ever had with anybody, and she told me how that really worked, and so that really ignited my fuel. And I thought I've got to make a difference. I've got to try to make a difference. And so, as you spoke, Jeff, from the Blue Campaign perspective, from NACS perspective, from NATSO, Stephanie, we talked an awful lot about what they're doing at their levels, what we're doing individually in the local levels, and all of a sudden, the next thing I know, the Hotel Restaurant Association is taking it on as one of their number one advocacy positions. And so now we've got kind of the three cornerstones of where most of the traffic, literally the traffic, will fall through, and that's hotel, restaurants, truck stops, convenience stores. And if we're sending that message out, I think we're making a difference. And to show you one little issue, walking through the Minneapolis airport, a couple of trips back coming out to D.C., there's this 8 by 10 picture of a person who's been trafficked, and the story headline was human trafficking. So we have elevated this to airports now, and it's in front of millions of people every single day. With that education, I think we're making a difference. With DHS and Blue Campaign, they are grounding this thing into being a public interest concern. And with our help, I think it's making a ton of difference. Now, have we cracked the code? No. Have we taken it completely down and it doesn't exist anymore? No. I'm not that naive, but I am excited enough to tell you that I think we are making a difference. And if we can keep this momentum going, this groundswell going, people like that young girl in that congressional office will come up and say this again and again and again, and then we'll know we've really turned the corner. So from that perspective, it was what had brought me to a little bit of that advocacy campaign back in my early days, the knowledge, the confidence, and all of a sudden, if we knock on enough doors, we can tell enough people enough stories that this will make a difference.
Now, for those that are listening and sitting back and maybe thinking about, well, what does participation look like for me, to use again your term from early on in our conversation? How does someone get involved? And certainly you've been involved from not the very beginning, but certainly early on, and you've laid a lot of the groundwork for some people to get involved. So what's that next step for someone that says, I want to be a part of that?
Well, I don't think you have to have one of those burning passions. You just have to have an interest. If it makes sense to you to get involved. Again, this balance, that's where I'm taking advocacy and participation as balance. How much time do you have to give this thing? And even if it's just one phone call, or if it's one meeting, or getting involved with another person at a committee meeting and telling your story, it's just the way to get started. And lucky for me, the start was the nice push. It got me headed in the right direction. And I think that happens day in and day out. I think it happens to a lot of people by just saying, I care. I want to be a part of a better community. I want to give back.
And we talk at NACS, we talk about community. We talk about what we're doing with food and how we're affecting with looking at nutrition and how can you offer healthier options. The other element is jobs and the whole labor market. And when you have a business where you're fighting for employees, because unemployment is 4%, and it's easy to go to another job if somebody's offering a couple cents more. But if you have a job where your staff knows that you're committed to something bigger, it's more than just a shift. It's really, you're impacting the community, and they want to be there for you because you are there for the community. So I would imagine that you also hear from the folks on your team that this is meaningful and this is impactful in their lives.
Well, it's meaningful and impactful, and they're also empowered to look firsthand to make a difference too. So it's not a more passive, advocacy either.
We all need to work. I mean, that's a fundamental issue with all of us. We need to earn money, and that's how we get through life. And there are jobs out there, Jeff. You're absolutely correct, and you're also absolutely correct in the team aspect. It was something I never even thought about. But when our own team, when our own employees, our own team members come up and say, I saw you on TV last night, which, by the way, just happened. I was on TV, and they were watching some show, and a commercial pops up, and then there I am talking about human trafficking issues. They notice that. They recognize that. They like to be part of something that's positive, that's heading in the right direction. I would say winning team, but we don't win all the time. But we do participate and try to make the community a stronger, better place to live. And people do recognize that. And that helps us. That gives us a leg up when it comes to employees. Now, I have to say this just on the side, and I'm probably running out of time here, but the guys that really run our operations, and we have about 400 employees and 26 profit centers, so it's not huge, but it's what it is. They've all been with me. The least number of years is 32 years. That's incredible. And that's accountants and HR people and division managers. The one fellow that I've got is 42, almost 43 years come August. He's never had another job in his life, and he's running all of our fuel stations. And I've asked him time and time again, why do you stay? He said, hey, why would I go anywhere else? This is rewarding. You reimburse me. And he's never asked for a raise. He's never asked for any of those kinds of things. He said, it's just good to be part of something heading in the right direction. And this is heading in the right direction.
And that's really what advocacy is all about. It's about telling your story. And when we announced our partnership with the Blue Campaign, as I said, about 18 months ago, we also sent a note up to Congress. We got more responses from their staff saying, this is awesome. They retweeted things. It was something where you just realized that this is making a difference. This is something people care about, and it's important to be involved in this, whether it's the Blue Campaign or whether it's another social issue that we can play a little part in making something different. And when you can go and you can say, I didn't just sell something today, I permanently changed somebody's life for the better, that's a pretty awesome day. It's
a big day. And Stephanie, I got to go back to Chicago when we were doing the human trafficking stuff back there. The owner of the company that the other fellow, I can't remember his name right now, worked for, sought me out at the last NACS or NATSO meeting and said, you were with my guy, you did a wonderful job. You spread a good story. So there's
it was a great presentation.
There's stuff there that just drops out of this thing, and you just never know where the next participant is going to come from. I guess I would say, yeah.
So if anybody wants to get involved in advocacy, we have a couple things for you. It's Stephanie and me. Our faces there on Convenience Matters website. You can click on contact us, go to convenience.org and click on things next to advocacy. Call us at NACS and we'll get you started. And we really appreciate, Dan, you getting us started in some really cool paths to make a difference in communities. So thank you for joining us today, Dan.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
And thank you for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.